Gerardus is a soil scientist with the USDA Agricultural Research Service at the Dairy Forage Research Center in Madison, Wisconsin. His research focuses on nutrient management in agricultural production systems, and especially with developing tools and models for phosphorus management. He has conducted lab and field research to generate the data needed to improve existing field, farm, and watershed scale models that are used to help manage agricultural phosphorus. He is originally from Maryland and obtained his Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science from Virginia Tech and his Master of Science and PhD in Soil Science from the University of Delaware. Today, he will be presenting his presentation titled The Annual Phosphorus Loss Estimator. Welcome, Dr. Vadas. I'll turn the screen over to you. And make sure you unmute yourself. Okay, thank you.
All right, good. Well, I'll get started then. So thanks very much for the opportunity to make the presentation today. And I'm going to be talking about an annual phosphorus loss estimator. This is a user-friendly model that we've developed to estimate annual field scale phosphorus loss. So, phosphorus loss from the landscape and its input to water bodies continues to be a pretty significant water quality environmental issue. This cartoon here is showing the issue that came up, at Toledo I guess about a year and a half ago with algal blooms in Lake Erie and affecting their drinking water and being attributed to phosphorus inputs to the lake. So agriculture continues to be identified as an important source of non-point source phosphorus. And so there's more pressure for agricultural to try to reduce phosphorus loss from farms. So when we think about phosphorus loss from farms and transport in the environment, what is it that we want to know about loss from farms? So first we want to know, how much phosphorus is lost from farms. Of that phosphorus that's lost from fields or pastures, how much is going to get transferred through the hydrologic network in the landscape through streams, drainage ditches, or rivers. And then once it gets delivered to water bodies, what's the impact going to be? So this is what we want to be able to estimate so we can try to manage phosphorus better, especially losses from agriculture. So today I was going to focus just on this first question of how much phosphorus is lost from farms and why we've developed the APLE model. So when we want to know how much phosphorus is lost from farms or a farm field, how do we go about estimating that? Well, one way is to measure it, and this is a pretty typical setup for how we might measure surface runoff and phosphorus loss in surface runoff from a farm field. So when we think about, what kind of scenarios we want to monitor for phosphorus loss, what kind of information we want to get, we want information on for different type of soils that are in the landscape. And so what I've done in this slide is just show, okay, if we want information on 4 different soil types, maybe within those soil types, 3 different levels of phosphorus in those soils, high, medium, and low, maybe in that all combined with different erosion rates, different amounts of runoff, different phosphorus application rates in manure or fertilizer, the phosphorus that's being applied, what the source is, whether it is manure or fertilizer, how we apply that, whether we surface apply it or inject it or incorporate it, and then we want to get information on different kinds of weather, whether it's a wet year or a dry year. So when we start to multiply all these variables out, these are the basic things that we want to know about phosphorus loss in the landscape and the big variables that are going to impact how much phosphorus is lost from a farm or a field. If we multiply these out, we pretty quickly get up to, just thousands and thousands of possibilities of in the landscape. So it gets pretty clear that we can't possibly measure everything everywhere. And so, how do we go about identifying then fields or practices that do need our attention to reduce phosphorus loss? Well, computer models are an important tool then to help us meet this need. So we can assess fields or farms that we can't monitor. So, another aspect of benefit of the models is that they can be cost and time effective. So this cartoon is just showing that, a typical approach might be without models that, well, let's implement something and let's monitor for several years and see if it works. But, I think as the phosphorus issue becomes more relevant, more pressing, people are looking for information and alternatives a lot faster than that. So we need information rapidly and cost effectively, and models can help us do that. So when we think about phosphorus loss in the landscape too, as I said before, there's lots of different variables that can impact that loss. There's kind of the variables that were just dealt with, whether it's weather or landscape or the soil types that are out there, things we can't really do much about. There's the phosphorus inputs and the sources of loss, fertilizer, manure, and soils. Um, there's a management that we impose on our systems. And then there's these transport pathways, whether it's drainage or surface runoff or erosion. So the purpose of this slide is just to show that, these all impact the amounts and different types of phosphorus that may be lost in runoff. But then all these things start to get interacted, and they all start to work together, and they start to affect each other. So it gets pretty complex pretty quickly about, how is a different management going to affect phosphorus loss or different fertilizer type or different runoff amounts or erosion. So we know that phosphorus loss is complex. We know that there's lots of different variables out there. But, when it comes time to make a decision about what we do and how we might manage that phosphorus loss, we can only really think about a couple of interactions at a time in our brains, So models can really help us to sort of map out all these interactions and do these computations and see how these variables affect each other in ways that we can't just do, as we sit and just thinking about things. So it can help find the great practices with the greatest impact on phosphorus loss, whether that's negative or positive impact. From a research perspective, models can help us identify important knowledge gaps, things that we don't know about phosphorus loss and that we can get more information on. So ultimately, models can then help us also make decisions based on information that's beyond our own experiences. So we're not relying on just things we might try to implement on our farms or field and a little trial and error to see what might work. Hopefully models can give us information about what may be the best alternatives. But, so I've kind of walked through a few of these benefits of the models, potential benefits, and why they're important, why we need them, why people are using them. But, in my travels, you certainly see that models seem to make people nervous, So why is that? Well, models a lot of times people feel that they're just black boxes. And, in a lot of ways, the big complex models can be black boxes. We don't really know what's going on inside them, the calculations. Um, sometimes we think that these big, almost sinister type things that you don't know what's going to come out of them. We have these sayings about models too, things like garbage in, garbage out, and this George Box quote about all models are wrong, but some are useful. So sometimes we have these negative sort of words that circulate around models, garbage and wrong, and so there gets to be a negative connotation with them, and a distrust of what they might be doing. So given that models have benefits, given that there are also things you have to be careful with in models. When should we think about using a model, and when is it really beneficial? Um, when I think about this, I feel like we could be using models when we think they improve our ability to make decisions, because several different things here. One is we understand and agree with the science and data behind them. We understand and agree with how they work and how they're generating output, how transparent they are, how much we can understand them. We agree with how they're being used given their structure and processes. We're not trying to force a model that wasn't really designed to do something to try to do it for us. And I understand that, we're not everyone is able to have the technical background to understand even basic models like ones I might present today. But you at least need to feel comfortable with the presentations like I'm giving that, yeah, I can understand that. I agree with this approach. I think that model is pretty good. And so I think we need to feel comfortable with them if we're going to be using them. But we can't, just be using models in a vacuum. We need to combine monitoring and modeling. So we know that the model is giving us good results, and we know that we're making progress to where we need to be. So this slide, I just briefly go over what kind of models for phosphorus loss are out there. What are the things that people are using? So you have this spectrum. On the far side of the spectrum are these big sort of complex quantitative models. These are farm scale to watershed scale models like the Chesapeake Bay model, things like SWOT, APEX. Models that are really complex, that are trying to simulate hydrology and soil processes over big areas and really take a lot of technical skill and experience to be able to use, and they require a lot of data and calibration. So these are not models that anybody is really going to just pick up and start using. On the other end of the spectrum, we have these simple risk assessment tools. You know, what most people know as p-indexes. So these are just, you know, trying to be user-friendly tools that use data that we have, information that we have, sort of put them into a framework where we can come up with an assessment of just the risk of phosphorus loss. So it's not quantitative. It's not going to try to tell you how much phosphorus loss. It's more, where am I generally? Am I high, medium, low risk? So what we've tried to do with the APLE model is kind of find a happy medium here, something that remains user-friendly, but kind of captures that quantitative and that process-based, which is a term you might hear too associated with models, process-based, those parts of these more complex models, but yet keep it simple, keep it user-friendly, but give us an estimate of the amount, how much phosphorus in pounds per acre is being lost from this field, and what's the source? Is it soil? Is it manure, fertilizer? Is it dissolved phosphorus that's in the water, or is it sediment-bound phosphorus that's associated with erosion? So the APLE model is what I'm going to be talking about today, and this is really a field scale model. So it's not designed to be used beyond the field scale, or you know, if you wanted to use it on multiple fields, you'd have to run it for different fields and add up the outputs. So in the next bunch of slides here, I'm going to walk through the model, you know, what it does, some of the calculations, the science behind it. I'll go through some of the output and some examples of what it's good for and how you might use it. So right now, APLE is just an Excel spreadsheet model that you can download. In their last slide I'll show you today, will give you the website where you can download it, and it estimates in pounds per acre annual field scale dissolved and sediment-bound phosphorus loss in surface runoff. So this is phosphorus that's going to be moving across the surface of the soil. It's going to be phosphorus that's dissolved in the water. It's going to be phosphorus that's bound to the eroded soil sediment particles that are moving with it. So it operates on an annual time step, which means it's going to estimate not phosphorus loss for an individual storm, but how much is lost in a year given the management and the annual runoff and erosion that's happening in that field. And as I said, it operates at the field scale. So it's intended to function like a p-index that a lot of you might be familiar with. So it's intended to be user-friendly, to estimate phosphorus loss for a given set of management practices, soil phosphorus, erosion, runoff conditions, but you know, be much more process-based and quantitative than p-index, but certainly much more user-friendly than these complex models that do exist. So the next two slides, I'm showing you if you download the model and you open it up in Excel, this is what you're going to see. This slide and the next one is where you would put the inputs into the model. So the first section here is just soil properties. You're telling it about the soil that's in the field. So APLE is designed to simulate just phosphorus dynamics and phosphorus loss out of the topsoil. So the first input there is the depth of your topsoil, and it'll simulate two layers in there, so we can look at phosphorus stratification, which is, you know, if you have a no-till soil that's getting consistent phosphorus applications, maybe phosphorus is building up in that shallow top 1 inch, and you want to simulate that separate from the soil underneath. Then the user needs to input a soil test phosphorus. We have this based on Malic 3 right now, and then information on soil clay and organic matter. So these are really variables that we tried to keep these basic to what exists in databases, what's easily measured with the soil test, or people might be able to get information on pretty easily. There's information then on transport factors, so annual rain that you would get for an area. So the big things here, the next two, annual runoff and sediment loss. These are inputs to the model, where as more complex models like swatters, they're going to be estimating internally how much runoff or sediment loss there is from a field. This is input into the model. So that's really designed to keep the model simple, but you would need to use an external model, something like Russell 2, to estimate runoff and erosion from your field, and then put that into APLE. And then there's a spot for phosphorus that's going to be removed from the field every year in crop uptake. And then there's inputs on the phosphorus that's going to be applied to the field. So there's a spot for if this is a pasture, so the model will simulate pastures as well as crop fields. How many grazing animals may be out there. So this is based really for beef and dairy. And the different types of animals that might be there. And then you have information on manure applications, whether it's solid or liquid. How much manure is applied, the solids content of the manure, how much phosphorus is in there. The one variable here is the manure WEP. That's water extractable phosphorus, and in a few slides you'll see how that's used in the model. But that's usually just how much of the phosphorus in that manure that you apply is readily available to be lost in runoff. Not all of it is going to be available. So what proportion of that? And there's some guidance in the user manual we have for the model that you'll see on the last slide that you can download. You can get input for those numbers. And then there's also information on fertilizer applications. So in the next few slides, I'm going to go walk through. I tried to make this pretty simple about how the model goes about taking all these inputs and calculating how much phosphorus is lost in surface runoff, whether it's dissolved in water or bound to eroded sediment particles, and then the phosphorus dynamics in the soil over time. So APLE is set up, when the model you download, it'll do a 10-year simulation, and it'll tell you based on your inputs, how is phosphorus changing in your soil over time. Is it pretty stable? Is it accumulating? Is it going down? So the first slide here looks at dissolved phosphorus loss from surface manure and fertilizer. So this is manure fertilizer that's applied to the soil, but is only partially incorporated or not incorporated at all, and the potential for phosphorus loss to be lost from those sources. So you tell the model first how much phosphorus is applied in manure fertilizer. Any that you specify is incorporated into the soil from tillage or a liquid manure infiltration or a manure injection. The model will put that into the soil right away, and you'll have an estimate of what's left on the soil surface. We multiply that by an availability factor. That's that water extractable phosphorus I mentioned before. For fertilizer, this is 100%. 100% of the phosphorus in the fertilizer is available. Manure is going to be less than 100%. So we're left then with what's the phosphorus available on the soil surface. And then we use a couple of, we bring in our transport factors, then our surface runoff, and do some estimates and calculations, and we're left with how much phosphorus is dissolved. How much dissolved phosphorus from those manures or fertilizer is going to move in surface runoff. And any phosphorus that's left over that hasn't already gone into the soil or hasn't been lost in runoff, that's all going to be put into the soil at the end of the year. So I'll just point out here on this slide that I've included a lot of these references to our publications in scientific journals. So it's just to show that we've really tried hard to document all the science behind this and all the data using where these relationships are coming from, and we've really made an effort to sort of take out the professional judgment sort of inputs here and base everything on data and the hard science, and keep it really to the most up-to-date science as we can. So the next one is dissolved and sediment-bound phosphorus loss from soil. So this is phosphorus that's going to come out of the soil that's there, and how much phosphorus is already in the soil. So that's going to be in two forms, whether it's dissolved phosphorus coming out of the soil, and that's estimated based on the soil test P that the user will input, and we have a factor there saying, well, how much of that phosphorus is available, and that's that 0.005, and then we multiply that by annual runoff. And then we're doing a similar thing with sediment-bound phosphorus with the eroded sediment. So it's, how much erosion you're getting, you multiply that by the total amount of phosphorus that's in the soil. So this is going to be more than your soil test phosphorus, and I'm going to show you in the next slide how we estimate that. And then a P enrichment ratio, which just shows that, when you get sort of preferential erosion of soil clay particles, well, they're going to be more enriched in phosphorus. So this helps us just do a better prediction of sediment-bound phosphorus loss. So the model, to get that eroded sediment phosphorus, we need to estimate soil total phosphorus that's in the soil. And this slide is just showing that, the model is simulating some different pools of phosphorus in the soil. And this just goes back to models developed in the early 1980s. And these are the same routines that are in models like SWOT, EPIC, APEX, if anybody's familiar with those. It's all based on, goes back to the same equations and same sort of conceptual model. So we're estimating an organic P from the organic matter that the user inputs to the model. The labile P from this, so the labile active and stable will be inorganic phosphorus. And that's estimated from soil test P, and then a PSP parameter, which is called a phosphorus sorption parameter. So it just estimates, how well that phosphorus can, that soil can hold on to the phosphorus. So, for example, a higher clay soil will be able to hold phosphorus more, and you're going to get more phosphorus accumulating in that soil over time. So it adds up all these pools to get an estimate of soil total P. The model also estimates phosphorus leaching out of the topsoil. So this is really gets to be important when we're getting soils that really have high amounts of phosphorus, a Malic 3 of, 400, 500, 800, even up to, 1,000 or more. The soil is really getting saturated with phosphorus. It can't chemically hold a lot at those really high levels, and so you're going to get a lot of phosphorus leaching out of the topsoil. And so we needed to be able to estimate that to be able to simulate soil phosphorus balance over time. So this slide is just showing that the relationship that the model uses. So it's using this nonlinear relationship, and this is just showing that on the y-axis there, as your phosphorus in the soil is increasing, that your phosphorus concentration in your leachate that's coming out of the bottom of your topsoil on the x-axis, that's going to be increasing dramatically. And that relationship is going to be different based on how much clay is in the soil. So a high clay soil is going to be able to hold more phosphorus and have less phosphorus coming out the bottom for a given amount of phosphorus that's in the soil. And this slide is just showing that the model also needs to know how much water is going through that topsoil. And there's just a simple relationship here to, depending on what kind of depth you want to simulate in your soil, and as you set the model up, how much water is going to move through it to carry that phosphorus out of the topsoil in leachate. So a big thing that the model does, which is a lot different from something like a p-index, is to estimate changes in soil P over time. So, we have our 4 phosphorus pools in the soil that we're simulating. We're simulating phosphorus additions to the model to the soil in fertilizer or manure, and it's just showing how the model is going to distribute that between organic and inorganic forms. And as I mentioned before, we're going to simulate 2 layers in the topsoil for P stratification. The phosphorus between those layers is going to be mixed based on the degree of mixing, which is, a function of the tillage that you say is going on, or just natural mixing by, by bugs and freeze thaw or something like that. Excuse me. And then there's also, crop uptake out of these 2 topsoil layers. So the model is really, set up to try to estimate how phosphorus in the soil is changing with time with all the inputs and the outputs, and what your change in soil test phosphorus is going to be. excuse me. So this is what the output looks like. So we can walk through this a little bit. On the left-hand side is estimates of phosphorus loss and runoff. So this is going to be just what is moving across the soil surface and surface runoff. So the model is going to give you information on the mass of phosphorus and the rate of phosphorus loss in pounds per acre. And it's also going to give you information how much on these different years, but also where the phosphorus is coming from. So how much is sediment-bound phosphorus, how much is soluble phosphorus coming from soil or from manure or from fertilizer that's being applied. So this is really, I think, a really nice part of the model, that it's not only telling you how much phosphorus is lost, but where it's coming from. Am I getting a lot of phosphorus from my manure? I really need to manage my manure better. Or um, is most of it coming from eroded sediment where, my manure practices are fine. What I really need to focus on is reducing my erosion. And then on the graph on the right side there, it's showing how it'll depict changes in soil phosphorus over time. So it's going to give you information on those two layers in the topsoil, and then the whole topsoil if you bulked that. So the next few slides, what I'm going to show is, what I really tried to do with this model is, really base it on a lot of data that's available to build the thing, and have it really grounded in the science and the data, but then turn around and get new data and test the model and say, okay, if I take data from a study that's a monitoring study that's been done, if I say, well, here's the field management that went on, here's how much rain and runoff they got, and can I predict the same amount of phosphorus that they measured for phosphorus loss and runoff? So this is what we did. We went into the scientific literature and got as much data as we could. So to assess the model for phosphorus loss and runoff, we used data from 24 different studies that we found from 13 different U.S. states, but then also data from Australia and Ireland. And we used their reported management data, their measured soil phosphorus, soil properties, and their runoff and erosion as inputs, and then we used the model to estimate phosphorus loss and compared it to what they measured on an annual basis. And we did something similar for changes in soil phosphorus with time. We wanted to see how well the model would simulate phosphorus dynamics in soil over time. And so we used data from 19 different studies, and this got to be a lot of data really, where people monitored changes in soil phosphorus from just a wide variety of soil types and different amounts of phosphorus being added, whether it's manure or fertilizer, and whether it's tilled or surface applied, from anywhere from 1 year up to 25 years of monitoring. So we've used the reported management data as inputs, and what we did is, so we would enter their beginning conditions in the study, and then see if at the end of the study, or if they measured soil phosphorus periodically through the study, could we predict what they measured as the change in that soil phosphorus over time. So this slide is just showing the results of our testing APLE for changes in soil phosphorus over time. So the x-axis is the phosphorus that was measured in the soil at different times in these studies, and then what the model predicted. So we really feel that the model can really do a really good job on predicting changes in soil phosphorus over time, given how much phosphorus is going in and crop uptake and removal over time, the forms of phosphorus, whether it's being tilled in or surface applied. It's really pretty good with that. This slide is showing our evaluation of APLE for phosphorus loss and surface runoff. So there again, on the x-axis, we have measured phosphorus loss from the different studies. So this would be phosphorus loss that they measured in surface runoff for a year. So for instance, we lost 10 pounds per acre of phosphorus per year. These units are in kilograms per hectare, but that's pretty similar to pounds per acre. And on the y-axis, we have what the model predicts for those conditions of the monitoring study. So there again, there's a little more scatter in these points, but we feel that the model is really able, especially given the few inputs that we have, the pretty user-friendly nature of the model, that you can get a pretty reliable estimate of how much phosphorus is going to be lost in surface runoff. So one thing that we've done with this is to try to compare, well, how much better, since phosphorus or APLE is really intended to be something like a p-index, does it do a better job than a p-index? So this slide is comparing, and one of the issues with p-indexes in the country is that they come in really all different kinds of shapes and sizes and different calculations and different inputs, and they give different output, and that's kind of been one of the things people have been struggling with phosphorus indexes recently. So this is just one phosphorus index that we've chosen that's actually from a state in the Mid-Atlantic region. So this slide is using the same data you saw in the previous slide from those different studies where they measured phosphorus loss and runoff for a year. We input the conditions in APLE, we input the same management and phosphorus additions into this P index. So what you see is that you get a much better relationship with measured phosphorus loss with APLE than with the P index. So this is not necessarily to say that the P index is wrong, because really both the p-index and APLE are using the same variables, the same inputs, the same important things that go for phosphorus loss, but they're really just doing the math differently. They're taking those inputs and they're adding and multiplying them differently. So what APLE is trying to do, it's really set up to estimate quantitatively that phosphorus loss, and so we have to set it up mathematically that's going to give us a chance to do that. Where a p-index, some of the mathematics are just not set up for that same thing. So I've given you a little example here. Sometimes in the p-index, when you input these information, this red circle here is just showing this is an example of a study where there was high erosion but low P application. So they're really getting a lot of phosphorus loss from this eroded sediment, but they're not adding much phosphorus in manure or fertilizer. So the p-index is saying, well, you have a low chance or low risk of phosphorus loss. Whereas if you look at the opposite, where you're getting low runoff and erosion, but you're having a high P application rate, well, they measured fairly low phosphorus loss, but the p-index is saying, well, you have a high risk of phosphorus loss. So what you find out really, and when you compare these same points with APLE, you're getting a much better agreement between the predicted and the measured phosphorus loss. So what you're finding out, with this p-index is really, this particular index, is really more set up to estimate the risk of phosphorus loss from your manure applications, and not from all your different sources, whether it's erosion or soil dissolved P and sort of give you that correct relative loss. So I think that's an important point in these different models, is to understand how they're functioning mathematically, or at least have somebody who can explain that and say, okay, what are they good for, what are they not good for, and not that one is right or the other one is wrong. So I've kind of, I've walked through some of the benefits, some of the things that make us nervous about models. I've walked through how APLE works, some of the testing we've done, how it compares with the p-index. But as I said, it's not like a Swiss Army knife APLE. You can't just do anything with it. It's good for some things, it's not good for other things. So we need to be pretty transparent about that and have people be using it properly. So what is the proper use of APLE? So appropriate uses, education is a great one about the factors that influence phosphorus loss. So all these input parameters that you're seeing in the model, these are the big things that are going to affect phosphorus loss. These are the things we need to think about. So we put all these variables together in a format that makes sense sort of conceptually, and then it's directionally correct that, if I do X, and the model says that phosphorus is going up or phosphorus loss is going down, then that's really what we're seeing in our monitoring data too. So it's not going to give you that wrong answer about, well, we monitor and it says it's going down, and APLE's not going to tell you that it's going up. And APLE is also really designed for quantitative uses, so it's going to give you that estimate of phosphorus loss in pounds per acre. So it's not going to give you a high, medium, low sort of numerical risk assessment. It's going to give you an actual phosphorus loss. It's going to estimate changes in soil P and phosphorus loss over time. So that's going to be different from a p-index that's just going to look at a single year. This will give you information about how your phosphorus might look like out 10 years or more, given a specific management. And I think a great thing about the model is that it's going to give you some more information about your specific sources and pathways of phosphorus loss, whether it's dissolved or sediment-bound loss, and for that dissolved loss, whether it's coming from the soil or manure or fertilizer. So what are some things that APLE should not be used for? Well, it's not event-based, so it's not a model that it's going to say, oh, if I apply manure today and I got rain and runoff at 3 days, what's my phosphorus loss from that storm? Well, this is an annual model, so it's not designed to look on a storm-by-storm basis. We do have a good model to look at those storm events for manure and fertilizer and soil as sources. That is designed for that. But APLE is not designed for that. It's not a spatial model, so it's not going to say, well, if I lose phosphorus from this upper part of the field, how is that going to track down through my field and get delivered to my stream, or track phosphorus through a grassed waterway or something. It's not going to do that. It's just going to say, at the edge of the field, sort of using this field as one management unit and one set of conditions, how much phosphorus is going to reach that edge of the field. So it's not going to look beyond the edge of the field either. It's not going to look at any buffers or treatments that might be implemented in the landscape. That would be a job for other models. So in the next few slides, what I wanted to do is just give a few examples of how you might go about using APLE and what kind of information you can get out of it, and how you can really pick it up and use it really rapidly to get some of this information. So one is just keeping phosphorus low. Let's say, for instance, that we want to keep our phosphorus loss from our field less than 2 pounds per acre. So I've input several scenarios here into the model, and so this first scenario is if we have 50 parts per million soil test phosphorus, if I'm getting 1 ton per acre of erosion, if I have 3 inches of runoff per year, which is maybe, if you're getting 30 inches a year of rainfall, that's about, 10% of your rainfall is becoming runoff. I'm applying phosphorus at 45 pounds per acre with a liquid manure on the surface. So, under those conditions, I can keep my phosphorus loss under 2 pounds per acre. So this next case is I've kept soil test phosphorus the same. I've just increased my runoff and erosion. So that's really easy to do in an Excel spreadsheet. You just change the 1 to 3 and the 3 to 6, and you can say, if I increasing my erosion and my runoff, what does it do to my phosphorus loss? Well, it's getting you almost up around 4 pounds per acre of phosphorus loss. So you're up above 2 and you're starting to increase. If I increase my erosion runoff even more, I'm stepping up in my phosphorus loss. And then if I repeat all of these three, but not with 50 parts per million soil test phosphorus, but 100. So there's just overall more phosphorus in my soil. You can see how much more phosphorus is being lost with that sediment-bound phosphorus. So what I like about APLE is you can really go in quickly and just, put these different scenarios in just a matter of minutes, and come up with these different comparisons, really. Like, if I think I have 2 tons per acre of erosion, I think I have 5 inches of runoff in a year. This is the manure. What's my phosphorus loss? And we can do things like this next slide is showing, what if I decrease phosphorus content that's in my manure because I'm feeding less phosphorus in my animal feeds? Whether this is set up for dairy. In Wisconsin, we have an issue with phosphorus in dairy feeds. So this would be similar to poultry on the eastern shore of Maryland or in the mid-Atlantic or other states. For dairy, what if I went from 0.5% down to 0.3% of phosphorus in my feed? Well, in the model, what you do is say, well, I have less phosphorus in my manure. I'm spreading the same amount of manure, but I have less phosphorus in my manure. I have less water extractable phosphorus in my manure. And so there's going to be less phosphorus loss in runoff, and there's going to be less phosphorus being applied to the soil over time. So if we look at, that sort of scenario, what we come up with, what's nice about the model, you can start to quantify what's the benefit of these practices on a numerical basis. So I can do this pretty quickly and say, well, over 10 years, I can get 9% less phosphorus loss and 20% less phosphorus going into my soil. So I get to start to get an idea of, just changing the feed phosphorus. So that's going to help me, but it's not going to transform my phosphorus loss from my field. It's going to get me 10%, and it's going to get my soil P down 20%, and that's great. But maybe it gives you an idea, of perspective of the magnitude of what you'll be able to do. We also have we put together some longer time versions of APLE. The one you can download is 10 years, but we also have versions for 30 and 50 years where we can look at these long-term changes in soil phosphorus. And this is just a couple of examples. In the top two graphs, we're looking at phosphorus loss and phosphorus in the soil, where we're getting 1.5 tons per acre of aeration, 5 inches of runoff, and we're applying 45 pounds of phosphorus per acre to the soil surface, so more like a no-till type situation. We're applying phosphorus for about the first 15 years, and then we stop phosphorus applications and see how long it takes for soil phosphorus to come back down. So how long does it take to build up that phosphorus to a certain level, and then how long does it take to get it back down? And we can look at different scenarios. At the bottom two graphs are really looking at basically the same amount of manure phosphorus applied, but you're applying it once every 4 years at a larger application rate, and you're tilling it in. That's kind of been proposed as a management practice. So what would be the impact of that of phosphorus loss and soil phosphorus over time? And there again, you can quantify what kind of magnitudes your benefits might be. So there's really been a lot of information about how APLE works, the background of it, the need for it, some of the testing we've done, and some of the things that you can use it for. So this is just a summary slide. We really tried to make the model user-friendly, require just basic inputs that somebody who's running a p-index would have this type of information already for APLE. Really represents most recent research on soil phosphorus and phosphorus loss algorithms. We really tried to base it on research data, so there's no professional judgment or, well, I think this is probably, twice the amount as this. We really tried to base everything on data. So when you look at the output of APLE, we wanted to make it, get good output on not only the quantity of phosphorus loss, but the different forms, and really try to make the model easy to use and rapid to use, where you could play around with it really easy and get these different comparisons for these different management practices. So I think the biggest challenge for APLE really is that it requires these runoff and erosion inputs, and these are really important. I don't want to underemphasize that. These are our big transport pathways, so we need to have good estimates of how much erosion and how much runoff you're getting from a field for APLE to give you good estimates of phosphorus loss. But I think I've been pretty successful using things like the Russell II model. That can be complicated to use as well. But the p-index in Wisconsin is using Russell, and a lot of these APLE type equations, some from APLE, some from the ones they develop here. And I've been able to use that model pretty successfully. So we can get decent estimates of runoff and erosion to feed into APLE. But you can also, as I showed before, just play around with different numbers and see how they change things. Just a quick information on how APLE is being used right now. It is available for download. The next slide will show you that. Since 2011, we've had about 600 people who've downloaded it in all the states pretty much, and lots of different countries. People are integrating some of the equations into watershed models. Things like SWOT, EPIC, IFSIM is an integrated farm system model. That's a whole farm beef and dairy model. Agro-IBIS, the Chesapeake Bay model, people are using APLE now to integrating that to try to improve their landscape phosphorus routines. And then people have taken APLE to help improve their p-indexes too. Wisconsin, Kentucky, Oregon, Washington, and also Maryland, and there's some efforts going on in Canada right now to use some of the similar approach. So this is the last slide here, and I'll just end with this. So, You can download the model at our, this is our website for the Dairy Forage Research Center, the ARS USDA website, and the URL's at the bottom of that. And you can download the model, and you can download a user manual, which is going to give some guidance on what kind of numbers to put in. And then there's also a theoretical documentation that really walks through in detail all the science behind all the equations. So two things I would point out, we also have that green apple there down at the bottom. We also have a model, that similar model that estimates phosphorus loss from outdoor cattle lots. These things are important in Wisconsin for barnyards, exercise lots. So we have a model for that. And then there's also a link to the Wisconsin P-index, which uses a lot of the equations from APLE, but it estimates field scale runoff and erosion using Russell, and it combines all that into a single tool. So that's my last slide, so I'll be happy to answer any questions that people have. I'm going to turn back the control to Marilyn.